This one's gonna be a bit different, folks. This one's gonna be a bit different. 2019's Joker was a movie that, in all fairness, didn't really need a sequel. It worked perfectly as a one-time standalone solo movie, providing a wildly different, brand new take on what is arguably the most iconic villain in all of media, in a way that's very reminiscent of older movies like Taxi Driver or The King of Comedy. And now, whether you believe that Joker was inspired by these movies or it ripped them off, that's an entirely different story. But whatever the case may be, it's definitely reminiscent of these movies in some way. And again, regardless of whether it was inspired by them or it was a ripoff of them, it doesn't matter because the final product ended up working. This is a Batman movie. There are Batman adjacent things in the movie's storyline, but it barely feels like a Batman movie, and that's part of what makes it so good. It has almost nothing to do with Batman or anything like that, but it just has small little details in it that make it closely related to Batman, and that ends up working in the movie's favor. Combine that with the absolutely phenomenal performance of Joaquin Phoenix as the titular Joker, or Arthur Fleck, providing his own unique spin on this character. His version of the Joker doesn't feel derivative of Jack Nicholson's version, or Heath Ledger's version, or God forbid Jared Leto's version. No, it feels like Joaquin Phoenix's version of the Joker. A fresh, unique take on this iconic, beloved character. Whether you love this movie or not, you cannot deny it is iconic. The scene where Arthur Fleck as the Joker is dancing down the stairs, you get what you deserve. Whether you like the movie or not, you cannot deny these are iconic scenes. Some of the most iconic scenes in any modern movie ever. And even though the movie works as a kind of origin story for the character of the Joker, it works as a standalone movie. There's no reason for it to get a sequel. The movie is meant to showcase a mentally ill man who is struggling in society until eventually he snaps and becomes the Joker. And this is around the same time where the city that he's living in is becoming worse and worse to live in. Protesters and rioters everywhere criticizing the current state of Gotham. And then by the end of the movie, these people look up to Arthur Fleck. They look up to the Joker as this sort of spokesperson for this movement. The movie does end with Arthur Fleck in Arkham, but it leaves you wondering, what is he gonna do now? That ambiguous feel to the ending is perfect because it's left to your imagination. What will happen with Arthur Fleck? What will happen with the Joker going forward? It works perfectly. We didn't need a sequel to Joker, and yet we got one anyways. A lot of people were skeptical at first with the idea of a Joker sequel, believing that, again, the first movie worked perfectly on its own. It didn't need a second movie. It didn't need a sequel. It worked perfectly as a one-time standalone movie with an ambiguous ending. And then it was later announced that the movie would be a musical, which further turned people away. Despite all of that, though, the trailers for Joker 2, no, I cannot be bothered to pronounce the movie's subtitle. I know it's a French phrase, I know it means a madness shared by two or whatever, but I cannot be bothered to pronounce it, I'm sorry. I'm just referring to this as Joker 2 for the entire video. When the trailers for this movie came out, it did make the movie look good. You have Joaquin Phoenix back as Arthur Fleck, but joining the cast, you have Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn, which is, that's definitely a casting decision, I'm not gonna lie. Who knows, maybe it could have worked, maybe it won't work. We have no way of knowing until the movie comes out. The initial skepticism that people had about the movie, the whole idea that it was a musical, the idea of whether it needed to exist or not, what could you tell about this character that wasn't already told in the first movie? That kind of went away with the trailers because they made the movie look really good. Whenever I saw a movie in theaters and the trailer for this movie would play beforehand, I'm over here thinking, oh wow, I can't wait to see this. This is going to be a great movie. This is going to be one of those standout movies of 2024. And as I've established numerous times before in previous videos, 2024 has been a awful year for movies. Easily one of the worst years in movie history. Good God. I was over here hoping that Joker 2 could be one of the standout movies. One of the few great movies to come out of 2024. And then the movie came out and I watched it. I saw that prior to the movie properly coming out in theaters, the reviews for it were negative, but I wanted to give this a fair chance. I figured this could be a situation where it's like critics don't like it, but audiences love it, because that's kind of how it was with the first movie. It got mixed reviews from critics, but audiences loved it. So maybe it's the same thing with this movie, right? Right? And then I watched the movie. What a f***ing disappointment. Honestly, Joker 2 is not the worst movie of the year. It doesn't come close to being the worst movie of the year. Stuff like Madam Web, Borderlands, whatever, they are far worse movies than this. But it is easily the most disappointing movie of 2024. In a way, I think this movie is worse than Madam Web and Borderlands, in the sense that, like, no one expected those movies to be good. I sure as hell did not expect those movies to be good. I willingly went to see both of these movies because I saw how awful the reviews for them were. The moment I saw Borderlands debut with a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, I knew I was in for a disaster. And indeed, I got a disaster. I did not expect either of these movies to be good. I expected this movie to be good, though. Again, the trailers made this movie look amazing. I thought this was going to be a great movie. I thought that director Todd Phillips would prove all of us wrong. Yeah, a Joker sequel could work. A Joker sequel could be great. So in a technical way, this movie is worse than Madam Web or Borderlands in that aspect. And the movie is not badly made either. This isn't some poorly made piece of crap either. This is a very competently made movie. There are a lot of things about this movie that give it that potential that, yeah, this could actually be a great movie. This is not a poorly made piece of trash. This is a competently made piece of trash, which, again, that's arguably worse. Let's get some of the positives out of the way, because I feel like being generous. Joaquin Phoenix is great in this movie, much like with the first movie. The thing is, though, and this is a bit of a spoiler, this is a very spoiler-heavy review. I should have brought that up in advance, but I'm bringing it up now. This is a very spoiler-heavy review. You don't really see him as the Joker much in this movie. This movie introduces the idea that, like, Arthur Fleck and the Joker are two separate people. The Joker is an alter ego for Arthur Fleck, something along those lines. You don't really see the Joker much in this movie, but you do see a lot of Arthur Fleck. As I brought up before, the first movie was all about how Arthur Fleck slowly but surely transitioned into the Joker. And that's kind of what audience wanted to see. They wanted to see more of the Joker. You don't make a movie that's all about how Arthur Fleck became the Joker and then have the sequel just be about Arthur Fleck only, barely giving us the Joker. But this is all stuff that I will address much later on into the video. And then similarly, Lady Gaga is good as Harley Quinn, but she is barely in the movie. She's only in the movie for like 25 or so minutes. This movie is around 2 hours long, and she's only in the movie for like 25 to 30 minutes. And she barely does anything in the movie. Her character does almost nothing. If you watch the trailers for this movie and you went to see it expecting a Bonnie and Clyde-esque story involving the Joker and Harley Quinn committing crimes, you will be highly disappointed, because there is nothing like that in this movie. As I mentioned before, this movie is a musical. Now, I could be wrong on this, but I believe the news that, like, this movie is a musical came out before any of the trailers for the movie were released. Before we saw anything of this movie, we knew that it was a musical, but none of the movie's trailers emphasized that, yeah, this is a musical. So if you went into this movie not knowing that it was a musical, you went into it because you thought it looked good and because you love the first movie, you're gonna look at all this musical scenes, you're gonna be like, what the f*** is going on? That gritty 1970s feel that the first movie had is almost completely gone in this movie. Again, I understand the first movie was either inspired by or it ripped off Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy, but still, that gritty 70s feel that the first movie had, it fits perfectly into it. It's perfectly executed, and it's almost completely gone in this movie. Oh yeah, by the way, this is a jukebox musical, meaning all of the songs in this movie, they're covers. They're not original songs written for the movie, for better or worse. They're all covers of existing songs. Now, the songs themselves are like, if you take them out of the context of like the rest of the movie, they're okay. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not poorly composed or anything like that. Without being disrespectful, I will say that Joaquin Phoenix cannot sing, but I have no idea if that was done intentionally. When you listen to him singing in this movie, you have to wonder, like, was it intentionally done to be bad, or does he actually like sing like that? Considering the way that this movie is, there is a very real possibility that, yeah, they made him sing badly on purpose, but who knows really. If he's not good at singing, then, well, it happens. Great at acting, not very good at singing. It happens. The problem with the songs, though, is that they don't really have much to do with the actual movie. There's like a lot of different songs in this movie, and only like a few of them are actually important to the movie's storyline. Most of the musical numbers are like fantasy sequences that you could cut them out of the movie and you would miss nothing important from them. You know, all of those really interesting looking moments from the trailers? Yeah, not only are they musical numbers, but they're also fantasy sequences. They don't actually happen in the movie. You know that scene in the trailer where you have like the Joker and Harley Quinn show or whatever, and you're watching and you're thinking, oh wow, what are they gonna do with that in the final movie? Yeah, guess what? They do nothing with it. You know why? Because it's a fantasy sequence. It doesn't actually happen in the movie. It has little to no importance to the actual movie's storyline. This potentially interesting scene from the movie's trailer, yeah, you could cut it out of the final movie and it would have no impact on the movie's plot. The movie would still be exactly the same with or without this scene. It's filler, basically. That's what a lot of the musical numbers feel like. They feel like filler. Like they're desperately trying to pad out the movie's runtime to have it be 2 hours long. Now, something that I will praise a few of the musical numbers for, a few of the fantasy sequences for, a lot of the set designs are really good. Even though I'm disappointed that it's a fantasy sequence, I do love the 1970s variety show aesthetic that the Joker and Harley Quinn show has. I'll admit that a few of the songs, like very few of the songs, they're kind of catchy, but that doesn't really mean much because, again, this is a jukebox musical. These are not original songs that were written for the movie. These are covers of already existing songs. None of these positive qualities changed the fact that it was a bizarre decision to make this movie a musical. The people that love the first Joker are not exactly the kind of people that love musicals. All of the musical numbers just feel like you're watching a parody of the first movie. Like you're watching something made to make fun of the first movie, which that could very well easily be the case, and I'll explain what I mean by that later on into the video. I'm willing to bet they made this a musical just because they got Lady Gaga in the movie. It's like, hey, we got this famous pop star in our movie, and you know what? A few years ago, she was in this massively successful musical movie. So you know what? It, let's make Joker 2 a musical. Why the hell not? That's totally not going to clash with the gritty tone of the first movie. No siree. Even if this movie didn't have musical numbers in it, it would still not be a very good movie. Nothing really happens in this movie, kind of. Again, all of the interesting looking moments from the trailers, they're just fantasy sequences. They don't actually happen, so, you know, that's one thing. But there's also the fact that in addition to being a musical, this movie is also a courtroom drama. This movie only takes place in 2 locations, Arkham Asylum and a courthouse, and that's it. You never get to see the gritty streets of Gotham City like in the first movie. At the end of the first movie, you had a bunch of people that were supporting Arthur Fleck, that were supporting the Joker, believing him to be this sort of hero for their movement. At the end of the first movie, there were all kinds of riots going on. on. People destroying things, lighting things up on fire, and it's like, there's nothing like that in this movie. I understand there is a 2-year time skip between the first movie and this movie, but still, it's like none of this stuff ever happened. Like, it was retconned out of existence. You know how Thomas Wayne was an important character in the first movie? Yeah, I don't even think they say his name even once in the second movie. The whole idea about like how the people of Gotham were tired of how they were being treated when compared to the elite rich people like Thomas Wayne, that's not explored in this movie. It's like it never happened. It's not acknowledged, it's not brought up, it's nothing. So to make a long story short, half of the movie is a musical and the other half is a courtroom drama. Again, if you went into this expecting a Bonnie and Clyde-esque movie with Joker and Harley Quinn, you're gonna be disappointed. At no point in the movie does it ever feel like things are building up to something interesting. Like it's all gonna culminate with something big and crazy happening. Like how the first movie, it culminates with Joker shooting Murray Franklin. There's nothing like that in this movie. I'm not asking for them to repeat the Murray Franklin scene, but it wouldn't hurt to have something interesting. It wouldn't hurt to have a climax of some sorts. This movie ends almost exactly the same way it starts. It feels like nothing really changes, nothing really advances forward. And now I have nothing against the idea of like a courtroom drama, but like this movie doesn't really do it all that well. So like most of the courtroom drama scenes are just them reciting what happened in the first movie. Arthur Fleck murders Murray Franklin. He murders those 3 guys on the subway, that sort of thing. Just recapping everything you already saw in the first movie. I rewatched the first movie the night before I watched this movie, and so it's like it felt redundant. I guess if for whatever reason you decided not to rewatch the first movie before watching this movie, I guess, you know, you can get a refresher. I have no idea. But half of the movie is just, hey, remember this thing that happened in the first movie? Yeah, it happened. And then the other half is the musical numbers. And it just goes back and forth between the two. And it's honestly kind of boring, really. It has the potential to be interesting, but all of the potentially interesting moments, they're musical numbers and fantasy sequences. The fact that a big plot point from the first movie is just seemingly never acknowledged in this second movie makes it even worse. A character that was important to the first movie is never acknowledged once in this second movie. The general structure of this movie is just really fucking weird. It's like normally a lot of movies have a first act, a second act, and a third act, but then this movie is just one giant first act. I could not pinpoint to you the exact moment the first act ends and the second act begins because there is no second act. The movie is just a 2-hour-long first act. It doesn't feel like anything advances forward in the plot. It's just a really weird structure, really weird pacing that I don't think I've ever seen in any other movie. And maybe in any other context I would be like, wow, that shows how bold and experimental this movie is, but all it does is just leave me confused. Why? This movie has a shockingly high budget of $200 million, and god damn it, it does not feel like a $200 million movie. I have no idea where this money went when making this movie. I mean, obviously, yeah, they have to pay Joaquin Phoenix to come back. Lady Gaga for sure costed quite a bit of money. There's no way she was cheap. Maybe the set designs could have costed money, you know, getting the licenses for the songs, I don't know, but that's not really enough. The first movie, for comparison, had a budget of, I believe, $70 million, and it feels like more stuff happens in the first movie when compared to the second movie, and it doesn't feel like a $200 million movie either, but it feels more like one than the second movie does. Apparently, this movie had a lower domestic opening than Morbius. I am not kidding you. The really bad word of mouth that the movie received prior to properly coming out. I believe they showed this movie first in like Venice, I believe, and that's where the early negative reviews from critics came from. This movie didn't receive a test screening for some reason. Maybe it's because they knew this movie would be largely hated. I have no idea. But over the last couple of days, I've seen nothing but people trashing this movie, movie, calling it a terrible sequel, and that is for sure affecting its box office. Let me remind y'all that the first movie had a $70 million budget, and it made $1 billion with a capital B at the box office. It was the highest grossing R-rated movie until Deadpool and Wolverine came out this year, and it still stands as one of the highest grossing movies of 2019. And on a somewhat unrelated note, looking at this top 10 list makes me realize, damn, Disney really did dominate the world in 2019. What a complete 180 when you look at how things are for Disney in 2024. This movie, in contrast, is definitely not going to make back its budget. It would have to make around like $450 to $500 million, and there's almost no chance of that happening. By the time this video is uploaded, it will be around a week since this movie was released in theaters. I went to see this movie opening night, and my theater was pretty packed. There were a good amount of people in it. While working on this video, seeing how it was about a week since the movie was released, I decided to check my local theater. I decided to check the screenings for the movie, and I saw that a lot of the seats were completely empty. Maybe there were like 4 to 5 people sitting in them, but that was it. It was an absolutely insane sight to see, considering how wildly successful the first movie was. This movie for sure is going to end up being one of the biggest box office flops of 2024, potentially one of the biggest box office flops of all time. It's almost incredible looking at how they could go from having a $1 billion movie to having a box office flop. A movie with a lower domestic box office than Morbius. As I mentioned before, this was in part because of the musical numbers, but there are other reasons pertaining to the storyline, so let's go over those, shall we?